Have you ever felt like your own children don't respect you anymore? Like no matter what you say, they brush it off, or worse, ignore you completely? You've spent decades sacrificing for them, nurturing them, guiding them, giving them everything you had, and now they barely call. When they do, their words feel distant, their tone impatient. You ask for help, and they sigh like you're a burden. You try to give advice, and they roll their eyes like you don't understand anything. It hurts, doesn't it? It's frustrating. It's lonely. And sometimes, it makes you wonder, what did I do wrong? But here's the truth. This isn't about what you did wrong. And it's not about yelling, demanding respect, or reminding them of everything you've done for them. Because the more you fight for respect, the less you get. Arguing? It only makes them shut down. Complaining? They see it as nagging. Pleading for their time? It just pushes them further away. Tom, what can you do? The good news is, you don't have to fight, beg, or force anything. There's a way to regain their respect, without arguments, without drama, and without feeling like you're walking on eggshells. In this video, I'll share 6 powerful ways to shift the dynamic, reclaim your dignity, and inspire your children to respect you again, not because they have to, but because they want to. If you've ever felt unheard, dismissed, or unappreciated, keep watching. This might just change everything. If you've ever felt disrespected by your children, comment 1 below so we can learn how to change this together. If this hasn't been a problem for you, comment 0 and keep watching to discover ways to prevent it from happening. Tip number 1. Stop chasing their approval. Margaret never imagined she would end up here. She had spent her whole life giving, sacrificing, putting her children's needs above her own. Late nights rocking them to sleep, early mornings making sure they had everything they needed for school. She worked extra shifts, skipped vacations, and even turned down opportunities, just to be there for them. And yet, here she was, sitting alone at her kitchen table, staring at her phone, waiting for a call that never came. When she did hear from them, it was always on their terms. A quick, distracted conversation. A text that felt more like an obligation than a connection. And when she tried to express her feelings, they brushed her off. "Mom, you're overreacting. Mom, we're busy." She started to wonder, had she given too much? You see, Margaret had made one mistake that so many loving parents make. She chased their approval. She thought that by constantly giving, always saying yes, and never setting boundaries, she would earn their respect. Instead, she lost it. Because here's the truth. The more you seek their validation, the less they respect you. When you bend over backward to please them, they start to take you for granted. They stop seeing you as a person with needs, and instead, as someone who will always be there, no matter how they treat you. But it doesn't have to be this way. Respect starts with you. It's time to stop measuring your worth by their approval. It's time to set boundaries, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. If they only call when they need something, it's okay to say no. If they dismiss your feelings, it's okay to walk away from the conversation. If they don't appreciate what you give, it's okay to give less. Because when you respect yourself first, they will learn to respect you too. And this is just the first step. Up next, we'll talk about another powerful way to regain your dignity without ever having to raise your voice. Tip number 2, don't argue. Lead by example. Have you ever found yourself in a heated argument with your child, only to walk away feeling drained, unheard, and more disrespected than before? You try to explain your feelings, but they dismiss you. You raise your voice, hoping they'll finally listen, but instead, they shut down or fight back even harder. It's a never-ending cycle. one that leaves you feeling powerless. But here's something you may not realize. Every time you argue, you reinforce their belief that they have power over you. Think about it. When they roll their eyes, raise their voice, or speak to you with disrespect, and you engage in the argument, what happens? It turns into a battle. And in battles, there are no winners. They don't walk away thinking, "Wow, I really understand my parents' perspective now." No. They walk away thinking, "I won this fight." And with every argument, they lose more respect for you, not gain it. But imagine a different scenario. Imagine responding with calm confidence instead of frustration. Imagine refusing to engage in their attempts to provoke you. Imagine showing them, through your actions, that their words cannot shake you. That's what true authority looks like. Parents who regain their children's respect don't do it by yelling, demanding, or forcing obedience. They do it by leading with quiet strength. The next time they challenge you, pause, take a breath. Instead of arguing, calmly state your boundary and walk away. Instead of demanding respect, command it. Through self-respect, through unwavering confidence, through the quiet power that shows them you are not easily rattled. Because respect isn't taken, it's earned. And the less you argue, the more they will listen. And speaking of setting boundaries, in the next section, we'll talk about the power of withdrawing emotional dependence and why it changes everything. Sarah loved her children more than anything. They were her world, her reason for everything. But as they grew older, she started to feel something she never expected: distance. She would call them, hoping for a long conversation, only to get a few distracted replies. She would ask them to visit, but they always seemed too busy. And when she shared her feelings, told them how much she missed them, how lonely she felt, she noticed something heartbreaking. Instead of bringing them closer, it pushed them further away. She couldn't understand. I've always been there for them. Why don't they want to be there for me? But here's the painful truth. Children lose respect for parents who depend on them emotionally. When a parent constantly seeks approval, validation, or emotional support from their children, it creates an unspoken burden. Instead of seeing their parent as a strong, independent figure, they start to feel responsible for their parents' happiness. And over time, that responsibility turns into resentment. The more Sarah leaned on them emotionally, the more they pulled away. Not because they didn't love her, but because they didn't want to feel trapped. And maybe you've felt this too. Maybe you've found yourself waiting for their calls, adjusting your life around their availability, hoping that if you just show them how much you care, they'll give that same energy back. But the hard truth is, the more you make them the center of your emotional world, the more they will try to escape it. So what can you do? Build a life outside of them. Find hobbies that bring you joy. Strengthen your friendships. Get involved in activities that make you feel alive again. Because when you are fulfilled, independent, and emotionally strong, something interesting happens. Your children start to respect you again. They no longer see you as someone who needs their validation, but as someone they admire, someone they want to be around. And in the next section, we'll talk about one more critical step: how to set and enforce boundaries that truly command respect. John had always been a strong man, a businessman who built his career from the ground up, making tough decisions, leading teams, and earning respect wherever he went. But at home, it was a different story. His children would interrupt him mid-sentence, dismiss his advice, and make decisions without even considering his opinion. When he tried to share his thoughts, they would laugh it off or change the subject. And the worst part? He let it happen. At first, he told himself it wasn't a big deal. They don't mean any harm. They're just busy. But over time, something inside him started to shift. He realized that the more he tolerated their disrespect, the worse it became. Because here's the truth. People treat you the way you allow them to treat you. The moment you let someone dismiss you, they learn that it's okay. The moment you let them talk over you, they assume your voice doesn't matter. The moment you stay silent when they disrespect you, they believe you'll always stay silent. John finally saw what was happening. His children weren't intentionally being cruel, but they had learned that his feelings, his opinions, and his presence didn't need to be considered. And that realization hurt. But here's the good news. What you allow, you can also change. One day, John made a decision. He would no longer tolerate being dismissed. The next time his son cut him off, he calmly said, "I wasn't finished speaking." When his daughter ignored his advice, he said, "I expect my opinion to be respected, even if you don't agree." And when they brushed him off, he stood his ground, not with anger, not with shouting, but with quiet certainty. And something incredible happened. His children started listening, not because he demanded respect, but because he commanded it. So here's your action step. Be firm but fair. Speak up when disrespected. Set the standard for how you expect to be treated. And in the next section, we'll talk about why giving too much, without appreciation, can actually backfire. George had always believed that being a good father meant giving. He provided, he sacrificed, and he never said no. Birthdays, holidays, even random days. He was always there with gifts, money, or a helping hand. When his children needed something, he made sure they had it, no questions asked. He thought he was showing love. He thought they would appreciate it. But over time, something changed. The gratitude faded. The thank yous became rare. His children no longer saw his generosity as kindness. They saw it as an expectation. And then one day, it hit him. They weren't grateful anymore. They were entitled. The truth is, when you give without appreciation, you don't create gratitude. You create entitlement. At first, George didn't want to believe it. He had given out of love, expecting nothing in return. But the more he gave, the less they valued it. They stopped seeing his generosity as a gift and started treating it like an obligation. And he realized something powerful. People only appreciate what they fear losing. So he made a change. The next time his son asked for money, he said, "I'd be happy to help, but I need to know that it's appreciated." When his daughter expected him to fix something without so much as a thank you, he calmly said, "I don't mind helping, but respect goes both ways." At first, they were shocked, but then something surprising happened. They started saying thank you again. They stopped taking him for granted, and for the first time in years, George felt valued, not just for what he gave, but for who he was. So here's your action step. Teach them that your generosity is a gift, not an obligation. Start saying no when respect is lacking. Let them experience the absence of what they take for granted. And watch as they begin to appreciate you, not for what you give, but for the love and wisdom behind it. And in the next section, we'll talk about the final and most powerful step, how to build a life outside of them and reclaim your own happiness. Arya had spent most of her life devoted to her family. She was a loving wife, a dedicated mother, and for years, her world revolved around her children. She cooked for them, cared for them, and made sure they had everything they needed. But when her husband passed away, everything changed. Her children, now adults with families of their own, rarely visited. When they did, the conversations felt rushed, distracted, like they had somewhere more important to be. She felt invisible, as if her presence no longer mattered. At first, she did what most parents do. She tried harder. She called them more, asked about their lives, invited them over. But the harder she tried to hold on, the more distant they became. And then, one day, she had a realization. She had been living through them, instead of for herself. The truth is, people respect those who have their own purpose. When you make your entire life about your children, they unconsciously start seeing you as an extension of their world, rather than a person with dreams, passions, and a life of your own. Arya had spent so long making them the center of her universe that she had forgotten how to be anything else, and they had taken that for granted. So she made a change. She joined a local hiking group. She started painting, something she hadn't done since she was young. She traveled, not far at first, just short weekend trips, but enough to remind herself that the world was bigger than waiting for a phone call. And something unexpected happened. Her children started calling her more. They wanted to know what she was up to. They were curious about her adventures, her new hobbies, her travels. Suddenly, they weren't checking in out of obligation. They genuinely wanted to be around her, because she had become someone worth admiring again. So here's your action step. Find something outside of them. Join a club. Take a class. Start a hobby you've always wanted to try. Travel, even if it's just exploring new places in your own town. Because the moment you start living for yourself, your children will respect you, not out of guilt, but out of admiration. And most importantly, you will respect yourself again. Many parents find themselves feeling unheard, overlooked, and disrespected by their own children. They give, they sacrifice, they try to hold on to relationships that feel one-sided. And when they demand respect, they only feel more ignored. But here's the hard truth. Respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you inspire. If your children don't respect you, getting angry won't change it. Arguing won't change it. What will change everything is shifting your approach. Think about the people you admire most. Are they people who beg for attention? Or are they people who stand strong, confident in their worth? The same applies to you. The more you chase after your children's approval, the less they value you. The more you sacrifice without appreciation, the more they take you for granted. But when you respect yourself, when you set boundaries, when you build a life outside of them, everything shifts. They no longer see you as someone waiting for their validation. They see you as someone worth admiring. So here's the key lesson. People respect those who respect themselves. If you want your children to see you differently, start by seeing yourself differently. Set limits. Speak up when you're disrespected. Stop giving endlessly without appreciation. And most importantly, live for yourself again. Which of these 6 strategies do you think is the most powerful? Comment below. Which tip will you start with first? Comment the number below. If you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe for more insights on senior living and relationships.